So it's time for the What Am I Sowing in November video, and it's a grim month basically for sowing anything. I generally wouldn't recommend it, but there are a few things and a few sort of special circumstances where it might be worth growing something. And so I'll talk through the ones that I'm sowing and the reasons why. So the first one is I'm going to sow some spring onions. Now I've got loads of spring onions in already, but whenever I plant a new bed, I like to put an interplant of spring onions in, and I will be clearing some beds in November and December and replanting them. So I just want some in reserve, and I'm choosing varieties that will bulb up as well in spring, so that if I end up having too many spring onions, I just leave these in the ground and let them bulb up and use them for pickling or as a early main crop basically. So the first variety that I've chosen is Stir On. As I said, it's an ordinary main crop onion, but it grows really well over winter, and as I said, it's a really good spring onion. So we sow that in clumps of about 9 seeds to a module, and I'm hoping for about 6 or 7 to germinate, something like that. Next one is North Holland Blood Red. I really like that one. It's one of my favourites. So those are the spring onions that I'm doing. I'll just do 2 trays, 40 cell trays of those, so 80 cells in total. So then I'm going to put my elephant garlic in. You could have planted it a bit earlier, but it's fine now. We're going to use some of it as like a spring leek, really. So you could, harvest the bulbs, but I think, one of the nice things about elephant garlic, it is in the leek family really rather than the garlic family, is that it is a multi-purpose plant. So just as your main crop leeks are sort of finishing in sort of February, March time, that's when your elephant garlic is starting to thicken up a bit. And so you can be harvesting your elephant garlic sort of, March, April, May. And yeah, it's just a really nice alternative. And then in May time, we start using green garlic as our leek alternative, basically. So we like to have leeks all year round, and that's the way we do it. So the next one is sprouts. Now, obviously, it's a crazy time to sow sprouts unless you're doing this particular trick, which is to grow them for their leaves in early, well, sort of mid-spring through to early summer. And the timing is a little bit tricky. So you can do them now, or you can do them in sort of January, February time. I often do both, and we see which ones are doing the best when it comes to planting time. But they're such a fantastic source of really tasty, really healthy leaves at a time when really the only other thing you've got are perennial kale and cabbages. So it's just a really nice alternative, and they're just so much more prolific than cabbages, and they just taste a bit better in my opinion than the perennial kales. So they're just a really nice crop to have, and obviously they last really for a really long time. You've got a really long harvest window with them, much longer than you've got with cabbages. Yeah, we really like them. So we generally try for 3 seeds per module, and we plant 9 modules per square metre. So they're really densely planted, and they do really well. But they will need a bit of protection when you plant them out in sort of February time. But if you do it right, then you get just in the hunger gap, when it's most difficult, sort of May, June time, when everything else is finishing, you get this really great harvest. So I also like doing the same thing with cauliflowers, starting them now and then again starting them early next year, and again see which ones do best. It's very much dependent on weather conditions. I normally would have started my cauliflowers last month and towards the end of September, but I just had some failed germination, so I'm going to do another batch well, basically tomorrow, and we'll see how they go. But you can start them now, overwinter them, and if they're disease free and they've grown well, then you can plant them out. I put them in the polytunnel in sort of February time, and harvest them in May, just before we put the tomatoes in. So I'm also going to do my last batch of carrots. Now, touch and go really whether they'll successfully germinate, but I've got a bed of salads and turnips which is just finishing, got nothing else to put in it, so it's in a cold frame, so I'm going to put carrots in it. Hopefully by December they will have germinated. They'll be tiny little plants all the way through December and January. It's worth putting a few slug pellets down because otherwise the slugs will eat them. And so at the beginning of February or the middle of February, they'll start to grow again and they'll romp away in spring, and you get a really nice early harvest about 3 weeks earlier than you would get them if you'd sown them in February. And that 3 weeks is kind of worth it if you don't buy anything from the shops, and otherwise you wouldn't have any carrots. So it's just a nice trick really for continuity. And it's, again, touch and go whether it work. There is a bit of a risk that they'll go to seed, but this late in the year, the chances are they won't go to seed unless we get a really hot February. A couple of years ago, when we did have that incredibly, like, you know, it was like May. It's like May in February. You know, that crazy weather, and all of my early carrots went to seed because of that. But you know, assuming that doesn't happen, then yeah, you might get a nice early crop. So November is also when I like to put my broad beans in, because I don't, you know, I don't want them to be very big over winter. I want them to be nice, small, compact plants, concentrating on root growth and not top growth. They stand in the winds much better over winter when they're nice small plants, and they're only about a week later than bigger plants that were planted a month earlier in terms of the harvest date. And to be honest, I don't really love broad beans that much that I care about a week's delay in their availability. We'll still have some in the freezer at that time anyway, so it's no big deal. Yeah, so all I'm about is just, you know, what's the best planting time for them. And for me, you know, it's when we're clearing the last of the tomatoes, which is what we're doing, you know, just before the first frost in early November. That's when we're going to put the broad beans in. So yeah, we've got plenty of field beans in, you know, thousands of field beans all over the place. Because we're growing that, we want those to grow really vigorously over winter because we're harvesting those leaves. But for the broad beans, where we're actually leaving them in the ground until we've harvested them for the pods, we want them nice and small. So having just said that I've already put my field beans in, I probably will put one bed of field beans in if I can find a spot for them. And these are ones that I will grow to maturity because I want to harvest the beans for next year, because my normal supplier for field beans isn't selling them anymore, and I've just been so happy with the beans that I got from that supplier, and I can't get them anymore. And so, you know, the only way is to save some seed. So I only need about maybe 10 or 20 plants or something like that, just in a little corner tucked away somewhere, and hopefully I'll get a nice little crop of saved seeds, which I'll keep in perpetuity, I can't say it, forever. And one last batch of marathon calabrese, which I'll overwinter as well, and then I'll do one last bed of lettuces. And it is a crazy time to be doing lettuces, but there's a good reason for these. So Navarra is my all-time favourite early spring lettuce. I really love it. It's really crunchy, deep red, etc., etc. But if I'd sowed it in September, I could pretty much guarantee that it's going to get downy mildew either in late autumn, early winter, or in early spring. But if I sow it really late, so the plants are really small all the way through winter, and only start growing in sort of mid-February time, then there's a much better chance that it's not going to get downy mildew, and if it does, it's only going to get it just on a few outer leaves, and I can take those off, and it's going to grow really nice and strong in early spring, which is when I want it. I've got loads of lettuces at the moment, so I don't need it now. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to plant it, but it's nice to have a reserve tray just sitting there in December, and then if I get any crop failures I can pop this tray in. If I get a bed, if I've got too much of something, and like now it might be salad rocket, for example, I might have too much of that, then I'll clear that bed and just pop this in instead. So it's just nice to have a bit of a reserve. I don't like to have any beds that are just empty. And so if I'm going to fill an empty bed, I want to put something in that I really like, and Navara is one of the best candidates. So yeah, so I've got some spring onions to interplant into that bed, and if I don't interplant it with spring onions, I'd interplant it with something like garlic, which I'd harvest for green garlic. So I think that's pretty much it. That's everything I'm planning to do in November. So I hope you like this quick video. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.